The Creative Corner with Miss Manda Art.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Creative Corner, where I interview creatives of all types in and out of the NFT community. My goal is to demystify creativity, and my hope is that each week listeners and myself can come away with new tools to grow their creative muscles. This week, I'm here with Amber Vittoria, an amazingly accomplished artist and poet. She creates beautiful compositions riddled with color and meaning. She has several sold out NFT collections that dive into aging, standards of beauty, memories, and so many more personal yet relatable topics. If her art doesn't speak for itself, her accomplishments certainly do. She is a Forbes 30 Under 30 recipient and has worked with clients such as Google, Warby Parker, Gucci, Apple, and so many more. So, without further ado, I'm going to bring her on. Hello.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Of course, so excited to have you. So, my first question, you have such a unique style, and you also have such a unique way of doing it. Like, I was watching some videos, and you use like a squeegee, I want to call
Hmm.
it.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of like a two-part question, but how did you develop your style, and how did you develop your system for creating what your art is?
Yeah. My style over time has definitely evolved. It started off figuratively, as many abstract artists' work does, and then it evolved into being full abstraction. And the process itself is a combination of what I've loved most when I studied art a while ago back in college, a combination of graphic design, printmaking, and painting. So the squeegee is inspired by printmaking techniques, usually predominantly screen printing when you pull a squeegee across the screen, and then on the flip side, the image populates. So that's something that I wanted to emulate, but doing it as a painting and not as printmaking. So slowly but surely, I found the tools that were right for me.
That's awesome. And how did your style like develop from figurative to abstract? Like, was it all of a sudden you were like, okay, I want to stop doing figures? Or was there some, like, was it a gradual shift? How did that happen?
When I first started making figurative work, it was because I struggled to see myself in figurative work done in fine art and museums, and then also how women were and still are portrayed in advertising and media. And as I evolved as an artist, the concepts behind my work became more abstract and kind of lived outside of the physical form. So my figures became more and more abstract as time went on. And then it got to a certain point where I no longer felt like I needed the figure to convey the message that I wanted to convey within my work, and that the emotion behind the piece or the emotional aspect of being a woman was something that resonated more with an abstract artwork versus a figurative one. So it was definitely slowly over a period of time, but the point where I was like, you know what, I think I've evolved beyond figurative work was actually after I entered the Web3 space. I wanted to do it for a long time, but my full income was reliant on my figurative work. And then once I entered into the world of Web3 and NFTs, the folks that collected and supported my work were like, we will support you regardless of the work that you make. So this, if you want to take that leap, you can. And I think that encouragement was definitely something that was very helpful for me.
That's so awesome. I love that. So that was going to be one of my questions is like, how do you balance client work, which I don't know if you still do client work, but
I do.
even if, oh, okay. So how do you balance client work with like your NFT stuff versus maybe if you ever have art that you create that you don't necessarily want to share or sell, does it feel like all the same? Do you have a lot of free reign with your client work or yeah, how do you balance it?
In the beginning, I started selling my work as NFTs February 2021, and then took a little bit of a break to learn a bit more about the space, and then more heavily started selling my work about 13 months ago. In the beginning, it was a lot to balance because I took on a high volume of client work, so I could pay my bills and support myself. But then NFTs, I was very fortunate that they were doing pretty well for me, especially during the bull market of last year. So in the beginning, it was tough to find that balance. Now, I feel like humans are very adaptable. We kind of figure it out as we go. Now I get to be a bit more selective with the client work that I do take on, which is really exciting. So I don't have to say yes to everything anymore. Whereas before Web3, I would say yes to everything. And worst case scenario, if it was something that was not 100% my style, I would try to treat it as a learning opportunity or a connection making opportunity. Whereas now a lot of my client work 100% fits within my style. I get to be a bit more selective with who I work with, and that allows for more time for me to make my own work, whether or not I mint that, and work that I end up minting either as a unique piece or as an addition.
That's awesome. I love it.
Thanks.
So
Yeah.
I love seeing the growth too, because I feel like I'm still at the beginning of my like art career and
We
just
all are, unless we're like
yeah.
90.
But it's yeah, I know, because I also have been doing it for a couple years now, so I'm not really at the very beginning, but I'm still like trying to get established, and it's
Yeah.
so helpful for me to hear about like how you were at the point where you did have to say yes to everything. And I love what you said about taking it as a learning opportunity, because I feel like there's like saying yes and no is such a hard thing to learn, especially saying
Yeah.
no. And there's been so many times I've said yes to something and then been like, why am I doing this? Like, I hate doing this and I'm not good at it. Like, it's not good for anyone. But yeah, like rethinking of it as a learning opportunity is so much better than just being like, let me just get this done and then move on.
Yeah. And I think that there are a lot of pretty established artists when I was in college and art school that would say no to things that don't bring you joy. And as much as artists would love to do that, we also have to support ourselves, especially for freelancers. So um, I would try to take on something that either was interesting to me, something that I knew could push me in a way that I haven't been pushed before, and that I had the time to. So in the beginning, no would be when I was too busy, which wasn't always the case. And also having the self-awareness that I might one day go back to having to say yes to everything again, and that's okay. So I think that sometimes we see success as like a linear growth chart, and it's definitely a lot of this and a lot of things that we don't see. And when we do take on projects that we aren't 100% in love with, we don't have to put those in our portfolio. I think a lot of times people think that they have to put everything that they've done on their site. I only put work that I would like to see more of on my website. That way, when people do find me and reach out to me instead of me reaching out to them, at least it's within the world that I would want to continue working in. So, sometimes I say yes to things that aren't 100% up my alley, but might provide a cool lesson for me long term.
That's awesome. Do you have like a system for saying like yes and no? Like I tried to develop a system of like to say yes, is it something that I really want to do? Is it something that will give me a lot of money? And is it so that I should probably say yes either way? And is it something that like the person that is asking me to do it, I really like them and I want to work with them more? Do you have a system or do you kind of just feel it out?
Usually I just feel it out because sometimes I'll say yes to projects that in the beginning sound amazing and then as I'm working on them don't.
True.
And that's why you should always have a kill fee. That way, if you're like, you know what, ooh, this is not exactly what I envisioned, that you can easily back out but still be compensated for your time. But I think the one important lesson is to be kind to yourself, because if you do say yes to something that later turns out to be a no, or ends up to be something that you don't really enjoy or you're not learning much from, know that at least you took a chance and you tried. Sometimes I feel like we could be really hard on ourselves. But no, I don't have a specific checklist. I think it's more about the brief of the project itself and the usage terms around the artwork and the delivery time and things like that. So usually is it, do I have time? If that's a yes, then, does this sound interesting to me? And then I'll inquire further. And then from there, once I learn a bit more, that's kind of when I make that decision, whether it's a yes or a no.
Very cool. And you also have way more years of experience kind of learning how to navigate it. So makes sense.
Always learning. And it's nice to talk to other creatives too, because everyone has their own process on how they say yes to work and how they say no to work and how they build their days out. So there's no one correct way to do it. It just kind of depends on you as a person.
Definitely. Definitely. So, going back to like your process and all of that, how do you what is your process for creating art? Like, do you visualize something first? I know sometimes like in your web 1:37 p.m. Interview, you had written a poem and then you were like practicing on prints and then, or studies, and then you went onto the big canvas? Like, does it always work that way? So yeah, how does it usually work?
Yeah, so for 137, that was more of an example of if I were to do a client piece.
Okay.
Usually I'll come up with an idea, I'll come up with sketches and studies, and then I'll do a larger piece. Usually work for myself, I just dive into. And if it doesn't work out, I start over and make a new one until it feels right. Sometimes I let that be the only version, and that humanity and error within the work is something that I try to gravitate towards and pull away from perfection. So, usually with my own work, if I'm traveling or in nature, I'll jot down in my sketchbook like a really rough sketch, or on my phone, just in the notes app. That way I don't forget the forms that I want to paint. And then when I get home, I'll dive into it. But for 137, that was more of like if I were to do like a full on process, or if I'm working on something larger, I might do a study just because larger canvases do take up space and
Mm.
time and money. So, but usually, even with larger canvases now, I just dive in, and worst case scenario, it doesn't work out.
That's awesome, because
Yeah.
in that interview, you were saying like, I had to learn to not be perfectionistic, or a perfectionist, and then I was like, wait, but you kind of are perfecting this before you're putting it onto the canvas, but which it still looked dope at the end. But it's
Yeah.
cool to see, like, I love hearing that it's kind of just like the human error is part of it. That's really cool.
Yeah, it was funny when we did that because I did a study and I was like, all right, I'll do the big painting. And they were like, can you do another study? And I was like, okay. So I think for that too, like that was a little bit more of just showing the different types of process, me painting on paper versus me painting on, I believe that was wood for that final piece. And I also, speaking of lessons, I learned that it is very hard for me to paint and talk while I'm being filmed. I know that that's something that artists don't really think of, but it I finished that painting with the filming. They're like, it looks great, and in my head, I was like, no, no, I'm gonna go back and do the things that I need to do when I can focus. So that was another lesson for me, that now that, like, when, not that it happens often, but when people do come and film, either it's gonna be something that it's kind of like just for like close-ups to show my process, and not a final piece, or I don't talk while they film and then they do a voiceover afterwards, just because the idea of talking about what you're doing and doing it at the same time, as much as I thought that I could do that, it's not as easy. So that was a nice lesson from that video as well. But yeah, usually I'm only doing studies like that by hand if it's for a client piece. And usually for client pieces, I'll do the study digitally so they get the idea of the forms and the colors, knowing that when I hand paint it, it'll be slightly different. And then I paint the final one.
That is very good to know about not doing art and talking at the same time, because I also
Some
have
people can do it. I cannot. I am
I have
not
a
one of
li
those
I
people.
have a YouTube live show called Miss Manda Live, and I bring on other artists and we draw
Oh,
together and I
cool.
interview them. And I was totally gonna ask you, but it is like one of those things that you have to, like, everyone that comes on is always like, "Oh my gosh, this is I can't answer this question and write." But
Yeah, usually like if I've done like, especially during the pandemic, like virtual classes, and like usually drawings like that, they're just more like really rough. They're not of anything. It's just like very abstract, rough sketches. Like that's fine. But yeah, to make a final piece while being
oh yeah,
filmed with all these like lights on you and like people asking you questions, is something that I cannot do.
that
Which I thought that I could. I was like, yeah, that sounds fine. And I did it, and I was like, luckily, paint is very forgiving.
it did look really cool at the end.
Thank you.
Um, so okay, I the other really cool thing about your work is like it has so much meaning behind it. Like in my intro for you, I was saying like it's personal but relatable at the same time. But with abstract art, or a lot of people are often going to have their own interpretations. So my question is like, how do you feel about other people's interpretations? Are you kind of like, think whatever you want of my art and that's great, or do you like hearing other people's ideas, or do you want them to like understand your kind of like intention with the piece?
I would say all of the above. So the reason
Mm.
why I write poetry with my artwork is especially A, because I like writing poetry, but that aside, is so for folks that struggle to view abstract artwork and pull meaning from it, they have a starting place. So they could kind of see what I was thinking while I was making that piece, or what the intention is for why I made it. With that said, it's also really lovely to be able to see how other people interpret my work. Usually where it skews a bit negative is especially on Twitter. Everyone thinks that they're an art critic, and love to give their unsolicited thoughts as to the fact that their child could make work just like mine. So I would say those are probably unappreciated. But then again, when people leave commentary like that, usually it's a reflection on them. So that work is triggering something in them to say something like that. So that's also interesting too. So I would say that, some people try to find something physical in the work, like, oh, it reminds me of this or it reminds me of that. And as people have started to collect and look at my work longer, their interpretations start to become more abstract and more emotional, which is also really interesting to see. But that's why I personally love abstract artwork. It's because you get to view the person as they're interpreting it. You get to learn a little bit more about them through the work that they're looking at. So that's always fun to see, outside of the negative commentary, which is like, oh, okay, sorry, you had nothing else better to do than to be a shithead on the internet, but good for you.
Also, kids are like amazingly creative. Like maybe
Yeah,
they're
that too. I was like, maybe go nurture your child instead of commenting on some stranger's artwork. But I'm not a parent. What would I know? But yeah, so I think that like it runs the gamut. And like the hopeful, positive aspect, yes, it's really lovely. But people on the internet love to be people on the internet.
that will never not be true.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully one day, but yeah, unfortunately.
So does every piece that you make have a meaning behind it, or is it sometimes like I just want to make something beautiful?
I would say every piece does have a meaning. It doesn't always start with a meaning though. So sometimes on pieces we'll have a poem that's written and then I make a piece inspired by it, but sometimes it's more intuitive and I'm making something that is form and color based and something that resonates with me in a way that I can't quite put words to it yet. And then as I'm making that piece, the meaning starts to come out as I'm painting it. And that's usually a process of me learning about myself, me learning about something or addressing something that maybe I didn't want to address yet, and just my emotional spectrum that is starting to come out in that piece. So sometimes it starts off aesthetic, but then eventually it will end with some form of meaning.
That's incredible. I love that. And that's what art is about. Like art can be so many things, but especially for me and I feel like for so many people, it's just like an escape and a way of like portraying what's on the inside. And the fact that you can use it to like find out what's on the inside is just so
Yeah.
cool. That's amazing.
Dang.
So has there ever been a time when you felt like creating something, but you had no idea what to create or you didn't have inspiration?
Yeah, usually, and then that's usually a sign for me to take a break. So
Mm.
like if I'm like, oh, I want to make something, but I don't know what I want to make, I'll go out for a walk or I'll go through, my camera roll of like usually of like plants that I see. I mean, New York is a little tough to see plants unless you go to a park, but plants or shots from national parks that I've gone to try to get inspiration. And I'll sketch in my sketchbook, but I try not to pressure myself, especially if it's work for me and not for a client. If it's work for a client, I try to budget in those creative blocks just to make sure I have enough time to deliver what I need to deliver. But when it's work for myself, if I'm not able to think of something to create, then I usually will pause and just wait it out and spend time doing other things.
That's like my favorite question to ask because every artist has something different. Like for me, I never use like I used to paint and draw. Like I could do an exact replica of another painting. Like I knew how to paint, but I never had my own ideas to share. And so for me, the only way I create is if I create one cartoon every day. And like even on days when
Oh,
I
that's cool.
don't have something to do, I still have to make something and I like post it on a separate Instagram and all of that. It's like my second year of doing it. And
Wow, that's wild.
it's been crazy, but that's like why I created all of this because I really
Yeah.
never thought I would be a creative person until I started literally forcing myself to create. And it really shows like there's such a wide range of creative people and everyone has their own like for me, if I was like, oh, I need to take a break, I probably wouldn't create again for like months. I
Oh,
just
okay.
would. Yeah.
Well,
So
that's still okay though too. Some artists take breaks for years and then they come
true.
back to it. Or I think that sometimes we tether our value to our output.
Mm.
So that's something that I definitely struggle with, and that's why I purposefully lean the opposite direction. It's like if I'm not
Mhm.
feeling it, then I'm not going to make
Yeah.
something. And which is why I've also slowed down my work too, is actually going through my hard drives and just like, organizing them. And when I first started making work, like I would have at least 30 pieces in each. I organized by month and then by year. I'd have at least 30 to 50 pieces per month. And I was like, how did I do this output? Like I'm just like exhausted looking at it. And I realized that not every piece was incredibly strong,
Mm.
and which is fine. As you learn, not every single piece is going to be strong. You're a human being. But I've intentionally started to slow down this past year and really allow intention to be put within my work. And that's helped me a lot, just to untether my value from my output. So, but everybody is different. Some people don't struggle with that and they like to create every day and like that's their thing. But for me, if I did that, the minute I stopped, I would start feeling bad about myself for not
Mm.
continuing.
Yeah. No, well, yeah. I mean, I'm planning to do this for the rest of my life, so we'll see. We'll
Yeah.
see how it goes. Yeah, I definitely need to think about that.
Yeah, because
Uh,
you might have a day that I mean, I have a lot of health issues. So, like, there are some days where I'm like, yeah, I can't even get out of the bed. So, like, I'm not
that's
going to draw from the side of the bed. But everybody is different. And I think that's exactly what you said is really the best part about being an artist is that we can all approach the work that we make and share with the world in a way that makes the most sense to us, which is the most incredible thing.
that was actually going to be one of my questions. But yeah, I completely agree of like what's the best part of being an artist. Um, what's the hardest part about being an artist?
That's a great question. Right now, I mean, obviously it's going to change as I grow, but right now, the most difficult aspect of being an artist is trusting in yourself, especially in Web3. Everybody is just trying to get their name out there and their name known, and people are talking about their legacy and what their work is going to
Mm.
look like long after they're gone, and to try to listen to yourself and not listen to unsolicited advice from others is probably the most difficult part, especially in an early career. Like I consider myself an early career artist. So that is the toughest part is to trust and listen to myself over others that I didn't seek advice from.
Yeah.
Um, and then also kind of drown out the noise too. I'm not one to, everyone in this space talks about legacy and like
Mhm.
what life, what their work is going to leave, what they're going to leave behind. And I'm like, I already have anxiety. I already live in the future. Like, I don't want to live in a future that I'm not even there for. Like, that's beyond my brain's capabilities. So I think the hardest thing is just trusting myself, staying in the present, and making work that resonates with me emotionally and putting that out there. So if I stick to that, that's usually my happiest place. The minute I linger on Twitter for too long, my mind starts to deviate. So that's what I would say the hardest part is just listening to yourself and knowing that you know best for you
Mhm.
most times.
Yeah, that's I've experienced that too because especially in this space when people if someone buys your art, they're invested in you now. It's different than just buying a print from you where that print's gonna have like retain the same amount of value whatever regardless, but like if you keep soaring then their investments like become worth more and I've really liked that aspect like quite a lot because I like having a community that's like really engaged and really like cheering for me. But there definitely are times when I'm getting advice from someone and I'm like, I know this isn't good advice. Like I just know it's not. And it's tough because I do like appreciate it, but at the same time, and I mean I don't get it on the same scale as you, so it's probably easier for me to manage. But
I
like
don't get unsolicited advice anymore from collectors because I've put up boundaries. We could talk about that too. I think that like you bring up an interesting point because if someone does collect a print, depending on the print, whether it's limited edition, screen
oh
print, lithograph, signed, unsigned, signed in plate, signed in pencil, like certain of those things will carry value long term
right,
in the event that, all goes well and you
yeah,
become successful. But similarly to that, to NFTs, I think the main difference is NFTs right now is just so much more liquid, even
mm,
for an artist that makes things that are physical. But sometimes folks that collect my work will feel like they're investors as if they're an investor in a company. And it's like, these are very different things. Like if you're
Yeah.
investing, like baseline Web3 is a high risk asset class to begin with, regardless of the type of work that you're investing in or buying. So the level set that I did is like, you are collecting my work as if you were collecting a physical piece, whether that's a signed print or a painting. Like that is the level that these NFTs are at. And obviously I've worked my ass off for several years and I continue to do that. And I want to do that long term, but please don't collect my work with the expectation that it's going to go up. And that level set has helped me a lot because I don't have collectors coming to me anymore like, why did you price this like this? Why is this priced differently? Why is this more expensive? Why is this less expensive? As if they're like my advisors, because they're not. So that helped me a lot. Sometimes I'll get the advice from the collector here and now where they'll be like, kind of telling me what to do. And I say, thank you so much for your thoughts. I appreciate them. And then I move on. Sometimes people just want to be heard, which is fine. We all do that with each other, but you don't have to take every single piece of advice that's given to you, especially from people that you didn't seek the advice from. But I often do think that tends to happen more to women within the space. I feel like, especially by men, most of the unsolicited, if not all of the unsolicited advice I've ever gotten in Web3, all from men, unless they were anonymous and I don't know their gender. So that's also something that's notable too. So sometimes you just have to smile and say, thanks so much, and then delete the tweet, because it kind of circles back to yourself best. And I do think that is the hardest thing to remind ourselves. Like I say it now as if it's so easy and I do it all the time. But putting up boundaries and making sure that your trajectory and what you want to do. And if you stay steadfast to that, people will support and believe in you, even if the nuances they disagree with.
Absolutely. That is incredible advice. I need to replay that over and over again in my head.
Me too. Therapy. Therapy is very helpful. Yeah. Because this is such a volatile space, and that's why it's so exciting. But yeah, usually the baseline is like you are day trading. Some people day trade on day trading the stock market is incredibly risky for one's health. So then day trading on an unregulated asset class just brings it to a whole new level. So I think sometimes people forget that and tend to project their fears onto the folks that created those assets, which I think will balance out in time as more people join and it becomes regulated and more mainstream.
Definitely. So I know you have a book coming out. Can you kind of describe that a bit?
So it's a book with Andrews McNeil. It's my first published book, which I'm really excited about. And it's called These Are My Big Girl Pants. And it's a combination of artwork that has been shown online before and that is new, even though I've made it last year, unseen, and then poetry tethered to each piece. And the idea behind the book is coming of age, and not in the sense that, you're young and you're, becoming an adult, more of reinventing yourself and coming of a new age, regardless of what stage you are in your life. And even though I didn't realize this while I was making the book, after the fact and having seen my work develop over the last, 13 months since, it really shows the transition of my work from figurative to full abstraction, which is really lovely because I feel that most times when people collect or curate an artist's work, it shows either a pinnacle moment or like their most famed work or work that is all cohesive in theme. And I really like that this shows a transition within my life. So hopefully it'll do well, and then I'll continue to make more books. And then I really want to keep that aim of showing transitions in life because those are hardest, I think, at least for me, to share, because it's like, oh, I wasn't so sure about myself. I was experimenting. And I think that it's important to show those aspects of our lives. So I'm really excited for it to come out. It's available on pre-order now. If you type in Google, These Are My Big Girl Pants, Amber Vittoria, it will probably pop up on some online bookseller that you can collect it from. But it comes out tentatively January 3rd. I think with supply chain issues, it might shift a few days here or there, but early January. So I'm really excited.
That's awesome. Did you create any pieces specifically for the book, or was it? Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I'd say like 10% of the book is like some pieces that were favorites from folks that I've shared, and then the rest of the book are all new pieces, which is nice. Or unseen pieces. Yeah.
So did it feel different, like creating knowing that it's going into a book rather than going to be minted as an NFT or going to be like as a print or any other product?
No, because my hope is that eventually, like, I'll be able to make NFTs from them, or, use them in other ways depending on the piece and the theme behind the piece. So I try to approach my work similarly, regardless of how it's being seen. If it's personal work, if it's client work, that's very different. If it's going to be on a billboard or on a t-shirt, you have to adjust accordingly. But for this, I just wanted to make work that, showed vulnerability.
That's awesome. Oh, I'm so excited.
Me too. Once it's in my hands, it'll feel real. Sometimes I'm like,
Right.
oh yeah, that happened. Well, it's happening. But when I have one, I'll be like, oh wow, I did the thing,
Yeah.
which is exciting because it's been a goal of mine for a long time to write a book.
That's so awesome. I'm so happy for you. I have chills. Um, so speaking of like big goals and all of that, if you had all the money in the world
Mm.
and you didn't have to worry about like client work or anything like that, what would your art career look like?
Probably similar minus the client work.
That's awesome.
I would probably
Yes.
I would probably still paint. I mean, if I had a lot of money, obviously I would try to be more philanthropic. I mean, I try to be with my own work and where I donate after each mint somewhere, just myself. But I'd probably paint a lot larger,
Mm,
and not having to worry about client work or budget constraints. I would have a big studio space to be able to experiment and make really large work. That's something that I want to track towards in the next 10 years because you don't need an unlimited budget for that. But in New York
yeah.
City, it's a little tough in a small
Yes.
apartment. But yeah, unlimited money, I think my practice would look the same. I'd probably be on social media a little less,
Yeah.
which would be
Uh,
really nice to not have to
yeah.
be online all the time. And so that'd probably be the only difference is no client work and slightly more offline and larger paintings.
That's awesome. I asked, I don't know if you've heard of Amanda Oleander. She's another big artist, and I asked her the same question.
Look
She
her
also said,
up.
"Oh yeah, she's incredible." Um, she's on and has some stuff on Twitter. She's more on Instagram though. But and I went to her
Okay,
workshop.
you knew I was going to Twitter. Oh my,
She
I was
has like
literally going to type in her name. Amanda. Nice. Oh, her stuff's cool.
right.
Mm,
Yes.
okay.
Yes. I went to her workshop and she is just an amazing human. Like exactly as sweet as she is online, she's like even sweeter
That's
in the real life and it's so awesome.
awesome.
But I asked her the same question. She also said she just wants to paint huge paintings and have her own like literally the same thing that you said. So that's I love
Yes.
that.
I'm trying to track towards it. My husband and I, so right now we live in New York City and we're both East Coasters. I grew up in an hour north of New York. He grew up an hour west of New York. I've been in the city for a decade. He's been in the city for about 15 years and we love it. We live in a small apartment, but we're moving to Los Angeles at the end of the year in hopes to rent a space that has more than one room. And hopefully I'll be able to either like have a studio out of the garage or of a room that like I can actually like paint and store large paintings. So I'm excited for that.
Yes, yes, that's so awesome. I'm so because
Mhm.
like it's so hard being like, and you were also mentioning like going out in New York. There's not like a ton of nature and all of like a lot of
That's
plants. So
another big reason why we're moving. We're like, ooh, there's actually nature in California. I
yeah,
mean, there's nature in New York. Don't get me wrong. All my upstate New York friends go, what are you talking about? Everything outside of the city is nature, which is true.
true.
Um, but just not as accessible and
Hmm.
varied in type of like, I guess, like geography and type of climate. So California has got a lot to offer that I think would be inspiring. So I'm excited.
I'm so excited to see how it like impacts your work too. That's so cool.
Yeah, it'll be wild.
And also I'm in Vegas, so I won't be far away.
Nice. That's awesome. Vegas
Yeah.
is dope. We've been there a few times. I mean, during the pandemic, so like didn't really get to like experience it as Vegas, but obviously now that we'll be in Los Angeles, so it'll be very close to actually experience Vegas as a city that is, not in lockdown.
Right. Yes, absolutely. I just have a couple more questions if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
So was there ever a time when you set out to create something and it turned out completely different than you had planned?
all the time. I think that especially for my personal work, I try not to stay to the sketch unless as I'm working through it, it still makes sense. Like because usually when I paint, I have to let things dry. So I paint, let it
Mhm.
dry, paint, let it dry. So between those periods, like usually my husband's on a call downstairs, or else I would just show you. I leave paintings out, and now sometimes paintings will take like a week or 2 weeks just paint, just because of how much dry time there is. And I get to look at it. We have a little spiral staircase that leads to our bed, which is where I'm sitting on. And like I could kind of peer down and look at it kind of like Christmas morning, but and allow the work to evolve. So like if I see it from afar, I'll be like, I might pivot this way, or I might pivot that way. And it usually will take on a life of its own. Sometimes it stays pretty close to the sketch, but I'd say more often than not, it starts to deviate as I paint and work through it.
That's all. I love that. I just
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is like when you walk by something, or even for me, because I usually work on my iPad, I'll think I'm finished and I'll text myself the picture so I can post it on Instagram,
Yeah,
and then
and you see it, and you're like, no, I'm not done
yeah.
yet. Yep, I do that too.
You really need all the different perspectives.
Yeah.
I think actually you answered all my questions, whether I asked them or you didn't.
Nice.
Um, so so when is like where can people find you? Obviously, I'll put your handle and everything, but where do you want people to find you? When like where can they find the book? You mentioned it, but just officially, just put it
Yeah.
out.
The easiest place to find me is my website, which is Amber Vittoria. Vittoria spelled with 2 T's, no C. It's Italian. On social media, I would say all social media, it's Amber_Vittoria. In hindsight, probably shouldn't have done the underscore, but that was when the internet was so it's still there. And then for my book, it's on Amazon for sure. And you can see like on my social media and on my website, there's links to pre-order the book. But also if you live in an area that, Amazon doesn't support shipping, or you opt to not use Amazon, if you just type in, "These are my big girl pants, Amber Vittoria," a bookseller should be able to let you pre-order. So that's pretty easy to type into Google. So yeah, that's where I
Yay,
am.
so exciting. Well, thank you
Yeah.
again so very much for coming on the show. Is there anything else that you want to add?
No, thank you so much for having me. I love these questions. I feel like they are a nice dive into, the mind of a creative. So I really appreciated them.
Awesome. I'm so happy. All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in, and see. Oh, actually, this is the finale of the Creative Corner of my season one. So
Oh, congrats.
well,
That's
thank you.
awesome.
I'll see everyone at season two, whenever that is.
Season 2.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Creative Corner with Miss Manda Art. A special thanks to my guest for sharing their creative insights with us, and to Joseph Capalbo for composing the music for this podcast. To learn more, visit missmandaart.com or follow me on Instagram or Twitter at missmandaart. Now, go make something. Anything.